Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending always from the area of the world you come from. My name is Stefano Moscatelli. Welcome back for the ones that were here last week for the lesson in introduction. Today we have an introduction to something more practical to see how can be the interpretation of an interior space made by an architect. Last time the lesson was considering the most important events of the history of interior design, analyzing the 10 most important happenings that marks and turns the history of interior design. Then we saw a series of categories of interior spaces where the work of the interior designer is requested. Today, I told you, we will see something more practical. We will enter in the way the project is made. The lesson of today, in fact, is divided in two parts. The first part, we will see a series of works made by some architects related to a specific space, and we will analyze the way these spaces are projected. In the second part of the lesson, instead, we will see how a project can be represented. So the instruments that you have for showing the projects to your client. For preparing this introduction, it was really hard to find an example that could be available to be understood in an easy way. And because of the possibilities, as we saw last time, are a lot in the interior space. Are a lot because they come from a series of choices that are related to three main aspects that you have to consider in designing the interior space. The first one is the volume. So how is placed a volume in a space? What is the shape of each volumes that you have in the space? The second element that you have, and it's the instrument that you have for thinking about the space, it's the light. Light that can be natural, so the light coming from the sun that passes through a window, through a door, and on the other side, instead, the artificial light. So the lights that is produced by lamps, LEDs, and all these technical instruments. And in the end, the last element that you have for designing a space, it's the material. So how is the surface of the volume? If you change the surface of the volume, your interior certainly will change. And so these three aspects are really important for the introduction that we are doing now. And these elements, with just these three categories of elements, it's possible to do a series that is infinite of interior spaces, a series of interpretation that is always and always different. So for limiting these possibilities, the only way that we have is to consider a space that was the same for a series of architects. The space that I choose is the Basilica Palladiana. Basilica Palladiana that you see here, you see some drawings that are quite ancient, is made by one of the most important Renaissance architects, that is Andrea Palladio, who realized many important buildings in the area of Veneto. So if you will come in Italy, you are a pleasure to visit these buildings that are unique, and they were models for many important architects of the subsequent period. One of them is the Basilica Palladiana, that is part of UNESCO heritage since 1994, a space that was in the past used for a government building, and now today instead is used for a series of exhibitions. The space includes inside three main areas, but the main one is the council room, that is the one that you see on the plan. Here instead there is the facade, the elevation of the space. A space that is unique and is not interrupted by walls, but unique. It is 52 meters for 22 meters, its dimension. Every year inside this basilica, since more than 20 years, there is an exhibition. There is an exhibition that is designed by a specific architect, that is representing the work that he did in the past. So every year you go and you see the work of an architect coming from different areas of the world, coming from Asia, coming from Europe, coming from United States, coming from America. So if we have in common the container of the space, it's nice now to see how this space is interpreted. Also because in particular the council room, it's a unique space surrounded by this series of windows that are quite characteristic, that are called the serliane, so are really important and really characteristic of these spaces in that time, and just four walls made of brick. So now, what we are going to see, starting from this space that is the same for everybody, is to consider how the architects in the subsequent years did their projects, using these elements, using the volumes, using the light, and using the materials. We will see more or less 10 projects between the more than 20 that were made for this space. Some of them were not made for different reasons. Others, the main part instead, yes. Among the ones that were not built but remain only on the paper, there is the one by Eduardo Souto de Moura, Portuguese architect who designed a building, who designed an interior space that is quite interesting for a series of aspects. Let's start from the first keyword that I use at the beginning of the lesson, the keyword of the volume. How are the volumes organized inside the space? Here we have a module that is always repeated, so the module is the same, and the rhythm that is always the same as well. So the space is organized in this way, and is closed by another series of walls that create a sort of incorporated room inside the space. So there is no natural light. The space was thought for not having a natural light because the windows, the light couldn't pass from the walls. And inside, here you see the sections. There are these modules that are translated into tables that are sustained by vertical elements. There is no natural light, but only artificial light coming from these lamps that are really focused on the projects that are exposed on this table. The second example was made 11 years before by a couple of Italian architects, Gabetti and Isola. They designed a space that has as concept the idea of an artificial garden. So looking at the left image that you see, the idea is that to stay like in a forest because of trees of metal that are present in the picture. But let's consider the keywords that I suggested before. Let's start from the volumes. The volumes here are organized in this way. There is a module that is always the same, is the white square, that has a rhythm that is alternate. So the distance is 2, then 1, then 2, then 2, then 1, then 2. So we have a regular rhythm that is different from the one that was before, that was always the same. Here instead is alternate. What about the materials? The materials are traditional, certainly, because we can recognize the wood of the surfaces, we recognize the stone that is quite strange in an interior space, but the idea was to create a garden, so this is the reason why the architects choose this material, and then the metal for these lamps studied by an important Italian company. And in the end, the light. In the space, the windows of the interior were blind, so the space was dark. The illumination comes only from the lights of the trees. Completely different and completely at the opposite, the approach followed by instead Oswald Matthias Ungers, who is a German architect who made the installation for his work, basing his idea on a certain simplicity. So the natural world that we saw before is really far now. The space and the modules are organized in this way, so we have always the same module as before, but a rhythm that is irregular. So first example was regular, the same, then alternate, and here instead we have a rhythm that is irregular. We have 4, 1, 1, 1, 2, 5, 1, 3, so it's always different. This module represents the tables and the glass containers where Oswald Matthias Ungers laid his models and his drawings. The light, what about the light? You see the windows are still visible, so they are not blind. So the space is characterized by the presence of a natural light, and for the evening hours, there are also some lamps that are organized in a really regular way over the table. Another project was made for the installation in 2000 by the Portuguese architect Álvaro Siza Vieira. Let's start again from the keyword of the volume. How is the volume here? We have a module, but also the multiple of this module. So the module is multiple, can be 1, can be 2, added in another way. So the module is multiple. And what about the rhythm? The rhythm is completely absent. It is impossible to recognize a distance between the singular module. What about the materials? Álvaro Siza Vieira is an architect who loves to work with traditional materials like the wood, and here we see them in the way the tables are made. The tables where, again, the models and the drawings are then laid. And in the end, the light. The light is natural, as the project that we saw before, but also characterized by the presence of these lamps that he designed for the same company, Reggiani, that I told you before. A light that is in the dark hours. The way this lamp is studied creates the effect of staying in the natural light also during the night, because the light is really diffused thanks to the way the angle of the lamp is designed, and also thanks to the material of the lamp itself. Another approach that is completely different from the appearance is the one by the group Zana, that is a Japanese group of designers who created this installation in 2006. How is the space here? Well, the space is organized with a rhythm that is regular. You can imagine behind these shapes there is a grid that is really regular and establishes the distances between the volumes, even if the volumes and the modules are always different. These modules are, again, the tables that are characterizing the space. A space that, from the point of view of the material, it's really in contrast with the existing building. Have a look at the colors. The colors are white and black. The atmosphere is really contemporary, so far from the pavement that is original, and so in contrast. The idea is to be in contrast with the materials, the white of the tables, of the walls, and the black of the false ceiling. Yes, because we are talking again about another choice that is directed into the creation of another kind of room inside the bigger room of the conciliar hall. What about the light? Here there is the presence of a diffuse light from the false ceiling with small dots of light that create a general illumination. Have a look at how many things you can do in a room. Here, instead, it's the example of Alberto Campo Baeza. What about the volumes? There is not a rhythm, it's completely absent. Every element of furniture that are the white things that you see designed on the map are completely random, and also the shape of these elements is always different. So here we are in completely freedom with respect to other projects like the one that we saw before. What about the light? The light here is we are completely in darkness. The windows are blind, and what remain is the light coming from the furniture itself. Yes, these modules can illuminate the space. And this is a fact that is interesting, the screens that blinds the space are used for the projection of the position of the sun during the day, but it's an artificial projection. Stephen Hall, American architect, was called to do the installation at the Basilica Palladiana in 2002. And he created a space that is mainly divided in two parts. There is a part with a series of panels, and the other part where he created a kind of house that was thought to stay in the middle of a desert. The idea, the volumes here, so have to be analyzed in two different ways. There is a part, the left part that you see, where there is a kind of regularity in the rhythm because the distances between the panels is the same, but the panel is always designed in a different way. While completely free, instead, is the house that was created on the right part. Toyo Ito was instead made his installation in 2001, creating a space that is again based on the idea of the contrast of light. The space is completely blind, the windows are completely blind, there is no natural light, but the light comes from these cylinders that are placed in a random way in the middle of the space. Even if we have a look better at the modules that are used for creating these columns, we discover that he mainly uses multiples of the same module, but not these two instead that are going by themselves. So light is in contrast, is artificial, and the materials are transparent because these tube of lights are also used for the projections of the projects. We go to another project that was not made but remained only on the paper. That is the one by the American deconstructivist architect Frank Gehry, the architect of the Guggenheim Museum of Bilbao. Here the idea is to work again on the concept of incorporation, so to lay a series of volumes, a series of rooms that contain the different steps of the exhibition, made in completely contrast from the point of view of the light, of the materials, and of the volume themselves, with the space that was around it. The space was thought like a big wave of metal for creating these different areas, but in the end was not built. So, in the end, what we can say about the projects that we saw? Projects that are based on these three keywords: light, materials, and volumes. The volumes we saw can be based on the use of a module that is always the same, a module that is multiple, or a module that is always different. Then what about the rhythm? How the module can be placed? The rhythm can be regular, so always the same, alternate, so it can be 1, 2, 1, 2. The rhythm can be always different, so 1, 3, 4, 2 is the distance, and in the end the rhythm can be absent. Light, we saw how many possibilities there can be, so between a natural and artificial, and if it is artificial, where does the light come from? And in the end, materials that can be traditional, modern, or contemporary. So these are the choices that the architects and you should have to do if you are designing this project. So now, after this introduction about the possibilities from the point of view of the project, I want to tell you something about the way you have to express your ideas, the instruments that you can use for expressing your ideas. Until now we saw these things, but now it's better to have a focus about the ways you can use. The basic way for representing a space is the sketch. Here we see the sketch for the artificial garden created by Gabetti and Isola. It's a sketch so really basic, just to find the schemes of the distributions, the ideas of the elements that should have to stay in the interior space. So it's the first approach to the project. Another example is the one by Siza that we saw before. Siza here did a sketch from the point of view of the man, so walking inside the space. What should have to appear are the tables where the models and the sketches are laid, but also these long lamps that should have to arrive at the level for the illumination of the tables. So this is the base for starting. Another sketch can be about the distribution and the way you move inside the space, and this is the sketch made by Toyo Ito. So the presence of a series of elements apparently in a random way, but with a really strong pathway that crosses the wall space. And inside each space there is the definition of the function that these areas have. We go on with a sketch. Here we see how Toyo Ito passes from a sketch about the distribution to a sketch about the details. So how are organized the circle that you see on the plan? They are tubes where you find informations through, and here it's really nice to see a sketch that is really detailed, the projection of the idea, the drawings of the project that he did. We remain in Toyo Ito, we remain in the work by Toyo Ito to see how this sketch can be later translated into a technical drawing. So the drawing here is not anymore a drawing without distances, but it has to be really specific for the definition of the distances, of the dimensions of the objects, for being clear to everybody that is interpreting and trying to understand how I can use this space. So here we see the different areas with the distances, and the writings that you see are the titles of the projects by Toyo Ito. Technical drawings that sometimes can be really poetic, as the one by Tadao Ando, where you can see the idea of the distribution of the space, but also a particular attention to the colors, to the way the materials are laid into the space. And this process goes on into the section that is a perspective view. So it's a section, but see as your eyes should see the project for real. Technical drawings that can be related to the pathways of the space, but can be related also to the way the illumination is studied. And here we see the project by Ungers, where there is the series of tables with a modular distance, and I told you before, over these tables there are these long light that runs for the long space for illuminating specific areas. And here you see how these areas are illuminated. There are different scales, different dimensions for the technical drawings. Until now we saw drawings that are related to the wall space, so are quite big, but technical drawings can be also for specific elements. Before we talk about the vegetable, the forest, the artificial forest and the trees studied by Gabetti and Isola, well, it's nice to see how these trees are studied with a specific drawing that is given for having a perfect element for the illumination. A step that certainly comes later after the technical drawing is the one of the renderings that today are really diffuse and important for driving your clients or your users in understanding what you are doing. Mansili and Tunon made the installation at the Basilica Palladiana in 2009, and in the Basilica Palladiana they laid a series of bags that were used for containing their projects. And here we see the renderings of each one of these bags with inside the different projects. So this is a drawing that is not only technical with the distances, but in a perspective view and also with materials and the lights. Many times architects passes then to manage the space in a better way from the use of a model. Here we see the model of the Basilica Palladiana of the room by Oswald Matthias Unger, so we recognize the section that we saw before, but studied now in a model where the regular tables that we saw on the plan are now laid. This is used for understanding better the space, managing better, understand the distances and the proportions in a space. Also, Frangeri, in the project that we didn't see before, use a model for expressing in a clear way his ideas. Building, this is the interior that he designed, but scale in a smaller dimension. So now, what can we say for ending, if not that certainly the possibilities, as you saw, are a lot. Each architect interpreted this space in a way that is unique and is different from the other ones. Each architect made a specific choice for the concept at the beginning and then for the light, the material, and the volumes. I think that all the architects that will come will do different projects in the future. And so, after considering these possibilities, now we want to launch a challenge for you to design your interior space. Knowing that you have a dimension of 52 meters for 22, you have a white space that is completely open, this series of windows that you have to decide if blinding or leaving open, and you can send these projects to the email that is now appearing on the screen, and now I can tell you the email is triennali@rmlinemodedesign.it that you can find, where you can send your ideas, and we will consider, we will give you suggestions if you want to try. And if not, thank you for your attention, and we leave a little time open for the questions if you have. And if I don't know.
Yes, we have two questions for you, Stefano.
Yeah.
The first one is where architects find their references?
Well, this is a question that it's really interesting, because every time an architect starts with a concept that normally can come from nature, as we saw before. We saw the project by Gabetti and Isola, it was coming from the idea of the forest, but it can come from the idea of the history, it can come from the idea of art, music, cinema. Last time we have talked about cinema. Cinema can be a good reference for the architect. So, the references can come from these areas and can be the starting point for creating a new space.
Yeah, the last question.
Yes?
Where are the most useful software for the presentation of a project?
Well, it's the softwares today are many. There are also here many possibilities. It depends from what you are doing, because there are softwares that are used for doing the technical drawings. There are softwares that are used for doing modeling. There are softwares that are used for doing rendering, so for placing the lights, placing the materials, and in the end there are renderings for the post-production. So more or less these are the four categories of the softwares. They can be infinite, they can be open source, they can be instead by payment. So the word is infinite, but more or less to close them in a series of groups, these are the four categories that can be used for preparing a project. If not, what remains from our tradition is the end, and so also the projects that you will prepare can be made by hands. They are really welcome.
Another question.
Okay, so thank you again for the attention. If you want to have further information about the school or about the activities of the school, here you have the references of the social references, so Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And see you soon here in Milan. Bye bye.